Let me just start off by saying that if you're a legitimate coffee drinker, the question is never whether you're going to drink coffee. It's when and how many actual cups of coffee you're going to intake. You're going to get to a point that you're just chewing coffee beans like a total weirdo. You're eventually going to use crushed up coffee beans for your salad toppings. If you're really about coffee, you will actually name your firstborn coffee. Okay, I'm totally joking. I'm getting completely off track here. I just would like to say I love coffee, okay? And I'm not one of those people that needs to add a bunch of creamer or sugar. I take my coffee black like my soul. I absolutely love it. I'm addicted to it. Word of advice, don't be like me. Don't depend on coffee for anything. Anyways, all jokes aside, all ranting, let's get straight into today's video because I actually wanted to talk about more of these fails. I did this with the DC Multiverse line or just the DC line in general from McFarlane. We essentially just talked about some of the biggest failures from the line, like things that the consumer base and the community as a whole just absolutely hated. And sometimes I do feel like there were fans that stepped away from McFarlane for some of those failures. And today we're going to be talking about the Black Series line. What are some of the biggest failures for this particular line? And we're going to do it in reverse. Last time I kind of built up to the biggest failure from McFarlane for the DC line. Today we're going to reverse it. We're going to talk about the biggest failure up front, and then we'll kind of, go down the ladder a little bit. Not to say that we're going to downgrade in terms of failures, because some of these are still pretty big, but the most recognizable one is first. And yes, we are talking about the Rancor action figure from the HasLab team. This thing was supposed to run about $350 here in the US plus shipping and taxes. You were paying closer to about like a little bit over $400. And originally they had like little accessories here and there. I think they had like bone accessories. They had like a cardboard backdrop. They had some jewel effect pieces that went on the inside of the mouth, but there just wasn't enough to get people excited. I think some of the stretch goals were like Salacious B. Crom and so on and so forth. Eventually they try to add like a Luke Skywalker as one of the last tier levels, and then I think they added a Rancor Keeper, but by then the damage had been done. People were just not interested in this figure. It did display incredibly well. It looked to be incredibly articulated. The articulation was just off the charts with a figure of this scale. Let's not forget, this wasn't for the Star Wars Vintage line. I believe there's already a Rancor for that. We're simply talking about the Black Series line. This is a 6-inch scale, so this figure was going to be incredibly big. It was going to be hefty. It was going to be like really good solid plastic all around if it was going to be able to articulate and stand up on its own. And so I definitely feel like there was value here. I just think they got a little bit greedy. They stretched the figure out as thin as they possibly could, and unfortunately it just fell incredibly short in my personal opinion. I've already done like maybe 3 to 4 different videos where I break down exactly how the whole Rancor situation came to fruition and how it eventually failed to get full funding. And so if you guys are interested, you guys can watch my videos. I've essentially spent like the last couple of years begging Hasbro to consider redoing this HasLab, because I think if they kind of readjusted the price point, added a few more tier levels, maybe this could go into production. Like there's definitely a possibility of that. With the whole tariff situation, it's probably kind of even more of a pipe dream, but I'm still holding out hope that eventually they come back around, they fix some of the issues, maybe they decide to scale down on certain things, and maybe it makes sense for collectors as a whole. But this was probably one of the biggest failures ever from the Black Series line, and it's definitely something that I had to start off with. Now, there is another HasLab project that actually ended up falling into the same pattern, was the live action Black Series Reva lightsaber. This was also a HasLab project. You were supposed to be able to purchase this at $500. If I'm not mistaken, the actual goal was 5,000 backers, and if I'm not mistaken, only about like I think 1,300 or 1,400 people decided to back this. It's absolutely insane how miserably this failed. And look, I'll be brutally honest with you guys, I don't think the saber itself is really at fault here. There is definitely some new engineering that had to go into the lightsaber. Usually you can purchase some of these Black Series lightsabers. I don't know what they're going for nowadays, but I think there was a time when you can get them for like a couple $100 $500. So $500 didn't seem that outrageous because it's kind of like a Darth Maul type of situation. It's a double wielding lightsaber, and so I completely understood it from that perspective. However, Reva didn't have really that big of a following. Not a lot of people were in on the whole Obi-Wan Disney Plus live action project. I personally really liked it. I enjoyed it. Not every episode was great, but most of it was pretty genuine. It was pretty intriguing to see Obi-Wan face off against now Darth Vader, because the only time that we ever see him is when he's older. So seeing Ewan McGregor versus Hayden was just phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. It was kind of a callback to some of the hardcore fans of the prequel trilogy. I loved it. And now, having said all of that, I understand why it failed. Reva just wasn't a fan favorite, and it feels like this is what we're seeing more and more consistently from just Disney in general. It feels like every single villain out there can be fixed with just a hug. Like, what happened to the good old days where villains were absolute villains? Like, they killed people. Even as great as you want to say Darth Vader was, and eventually Luke, and how he turned to the light side right before he died, he was still a pretty dark figure. Like, the dude went around and, you know, essentially ended the entire Jedi Order. So there was a time when villains were dark, villains were about just causing mayhem and just literally ending people. Now it feels like every other villain, you can just have an all-out conversation with him and talk him down, kind of with what happened with Red Hulk, kind of what happened with Sentry, and then, you know, now we're seeing it play out in the Star Wars universe. But, you know, Reva, the lightsaber, I think was phenomenal. It was an Inquisitor saber. I mean, who doesn't want that in their display? Unfortunately, it completely failed, and I think it clearly showed that the HasLab team and just Hasbro in general doesn't exactly know what their consumers want. I mean, if they're releasing helmets, those are flying off the shelves, they're selling incredibly well. Most of the sabers sell incredibly well, but when they decide to kind of stretch it a little bit and give people, or give the consumer base, their fan base, an expensive collectible based on a character that very few people gravitated toward. Like, the consensus for the character herself was okay, mediocre, but the show just wasn't very well received, and it was definitely very questionable the way that they went about it. But moving on, one of the other big failures, and this was across the board for the Black Series line, has to be the soft cloth goods that are included with some of these releases. You have, for example, Princess Leia, who has multiple different releases with soft cloth goods, and it just doesn't look good. It looks really weird. It's very difficult to deal with, especially if you're gonna photograph your action figures or come up with a little display. We have also received Darth Sidious and a number of different looks with soft goods, and every single one of them has had their own problems. I think the newer one has the hood actually sculpted on like it's plastic. It's not soft goods. However, I think the entire torso actually has soft goods, and the plastic hood actually makes way more sense than the soft cloth version. However, it still looks weird, especially if you're up close. You can definitely tell the difference between the plastic and the soft goods, and it just doesn't look very good. If I'm not mistaken, we also got an SDCC Darth Maul that came with like a speeder. That one also had a soft goods hood, and it also didn't look very good. I mean, you could actually remove the hood or have it draped around the shoulders, but it just felt kind of like it got in the way of the figure, and most people just displayed with the hood down anyways. I know they just recently did a Star Wars Vision action figure release, and I have very little experience because I did not like the whole Visions Disney Plus series. However, I know they did a character that's based in that animated series, and it actually had some soft cloth with some wire running through it, which, you know, looked great. It displayed incredibly well. I'm hoping that that's something that they continue to kind of like expand on when it comes to the Black Series line. We know that Hasbro has already confirmed that they're going to continue manufacturing Star Wars action figures in the Black Series line and all the other sublines, as well as Marvel Legends. So it only makes sense that they continue to evolve and make the Star Wars Black Series line better. And the soft cloth goods, I think, is definitely something that they can work on. Add just a little, you know, a thin little wire running between the soft cloth, and just give us even more options on how to display some of our most iconic Star Wars Black Series action figures. And then I hate to generalize, but honestly, one of the bigger fails from the Black Series line, at least in my personal opinion, has to be the articulation scheme. I've never understood exactly why we get a very similar articulation scheme, very similar engineering from the Classifieds line as well as the Marvel Legends line, but then the Black Series line is completely different. Like, we're still getting single jointed elbows from time to time. A lot of the female characters as well as the male characters do not come with butterfly joints. I'm not saying I want Yoda to do the splits or anything crazy like that, but I would love to see what like a heavily articulated Luke Skywalker action figure could really do. I want to get them into some crazy dynamic poses, and unfortunately the Black Series line definitely does not lend itself to that. Sometimes the ab crunch is absolutely horrendous. There's no butterfly joints, single jointed elbows, and then it's just a ball joint at the neck, so the neck articulation is just absolutely awful as well. So I've never quite understood why they don't just copy and paste the Marvel Legends articulation or some of the newer tech at least onto the Black Series line. It's absolutely baffling to me. I like what they did, for example, with the new clone body mold, I think from, 2023? Better articulation, can get into some more crazy poses. Why not apply that same technique or that same style across the board? Not just for Luke, but just, in general, any, like Jedi lightsaber wielding character should be able to get into some semi-crazy poses. And unfortunately, so far from the Black Series line, that's something that has been missing pretty consistently. But as always, let me know your thoughts down below. Which do you guys feel is one of the biggest fails from the Hasbro Black Series line? Very curious to see what you guys have to say down below in the comment section. And if I miss anything, definitely make sure to include it in the comments. I can't include everything. There were quite a few other things that I wanted to include, but I didn't want to make this video extremely long. Wanted to keep it short and simple. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Stay safe out there. And as always, if you guys enjoy this type of rambling content, make sure to stay tuned. Enjoy the hobby, pose your action figures, play around with them, whatever it is that you do to enjoy them. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.